Okay, just like we did in Writer's Workshop, I want to kind of go back and take a look at some of the things that we have been doing in our unit. Excuse me for 1 second, let me just grab this. It's always good sometimes to go back and take a look at where we started and how we've traveled in the unit, okay? So on Tuesday, we talked about how important it was to be reading with urgency, that we should be working on goals that we have, and that we are constantly trying to improve our what we call our writerly life by setting goals for ourselves. We might want to read more. That might be a goal that we set for ourselves. We might want to read more deeply into a story by making connections throughout the different parts. We might want to work on being able to identify the parts of a story. I know that when I looked at your pre-tests, a lot of you had trouble naming the story element. Okay, so your goal might be to try to learn the story elements and work to identify those story elements in your story as you're reading. Let me pull this up so it's not hitting you on the head. There you go. Okay, and then yesterday we spent quite some time modeling what writing about reading looks like at a 5th grade level. And we emphasized how we have to not just read it, but we have to ask, not just read it and notice, but we have to ask why. Why is the author telling the story this way? Why is the author using these words? Because the whys, the answer to those why questions about the choices that an author makes, helps us to determine the message that the author is trying to send us, which ultimately means that it's easier to identify the theme. So we're not just sitting there every single time we're reading a book and saying, don't give up, keep on trying, okay? Because books are deeper than that. And books have other themes than what seem to be the obvious. We want to be able to find multiple themes in the books that we're reading. Okay, so today, and I love the way these two units, our narrative writing unit and our interpretation unit, they kind of what we call dovetail, okay? They fit closely with each other. Now, in Writer's Workshop today, we were reading a mentor text and we were kind of reading it as a writer, noticing the way that the story was written, noticing the craft, okay, noticing the how it was written. And a 5th grade reader is also going to do these same things when they're reading. Because when we analyze or we read something with a writerly mind, we're going to notice those choices that that author made. And we are going to be able to use those choices the author made as part of our interpretation, as part of our idea that we're growing about the story. So today I'm going to ask you, as I read this next section, to be thinking about our read aloud story in terms of how the writer is telling this story and how the way the writer is telling the story is contributing to the message. Okay? Now, we've already noticed several things. If you remember, we noticed that the story is being written in what looks like, from the format, to be free verse poetry. But the story is being told by the perspective of Keck. We don't know a lot about Keck, especially we don't know that if he knows how to write free verse poetry. So when we're reading with a writerly mind, we might be asking ourselves, does Keck know how to write free verse poetry? Is that a talent he has? If it's not a talent he has, why is Katherine Applegate telling the story using free verse poetry? What might she be trying to tell us? Okay, and it seems like I keep repeating those questions over and over again, but those are the types of questions that a good reader is asking as they are reading or listening to a read aloud, reading their own book independently. All right, so this next section is called questions. Questions. We drive past buildings. Everywhere, buildings. Everywhere, cars. Everywhere, dead trees. Who killed all the trees, I ask. So one of the ideas that we've been growing is this contrast between where Keck is coming from and where he has landed. And we can see that Catherine Applegate keeps bringing up the contrast. We can also see that from the way that she's choosing her words and telling the story, that Keck is kind of looking at the world in Minnesota a little bit differently because it's so new to him. And as he's describing what he's seeing, okay, it's being described in such a way that is very unusual. They're not dead, Dave says. This is called winter. And it happens every year. In spring, their leaves will come back. You'll see. And while we don't live in the north ourselves, we do see that on some of our trees. Our live oak trees do not shed their leaves all at once. They shed a little bit all the time. But some of our others, especially if we have sycamores in the backyard, in the playground, they lose their leaves. And if you looked at those trees in the winter, you might think they're dead because there are no leaves on them. Now, you have to read, remember, with this writerly mind, and you have to remember this idea we're growing about the contrast between the two. Okay, so are you thinking like a fifth grade reader? Are you realizing that in Africa, where Keck comes from, thank you, in Africa where Keck comes from, the trees there retain their leaves all year. Are you thinking that way when I'm reading this? Hello. Yes? Yes, okay. My laptop computer is in my office and the computer cart is back there. Thank you. Okay, so remember, yesterday we worked on, are we reading like fifth graders and are we writing at a fifth grade level when we're writing about our reading? So if we continue to practice that, we know that we should be noticing this. Not only does he think that the trees are dead because there are no leaves on them, but we can also infer that in Africa, where he comes from, the trees keep their leaves year-round. So remember, even though yesterday was the day we talked about thinking and being aware of our reading at a fifth grade level, we have to do that every day. We don't just do it on the day that that's part of our mini lesson. We continue to do that. He turns to smile. His eyes are wise and calm. The eyes of a village elder. Your family will be happy to see you, Dave says. But he doesn't mean my truest family. My mother and father and brother. Okay, so you're learning something new about Keck. I love seeing some of you are flipping to your page that you've kept about Keck so that you have all your information about Keck on one page. I'll read that section again. Your family will be happy to see you, Dave says. But he doesn't mean my truest family. My mother and father and brother. I don't answer. I reach into my pocket and feel the soft cloth I carry with me everywhere. Okay, I love seeing the people that are paying attention. You started jotting that down. If you didn't jot that down, you might want to ask yourself if you are engaged in the lesson. Joshua. I don't answer. I reach into my pocket and feel the soft cloth I carry with me everywhere. Blue and yellow, torn at the edges, the size of my hand, soft as new grass after good rain. Dave asks, when did you last see your aunt and your cousin? Okay, so remember, if we're still thinking like a fifth grade reader from yesterday's lesson, if we're listening to this in a writerly, with a writerly mind, ears and eyes, we're thinking about the fact that we are learning here that Keck is in America, but not with his father and mother and brother. Keck is coming to America, and he's going to be with his aunt and his cousin. So if we're thinking about this with a writerly mind, we're thinking about how he must feel to be away from his truest family, which is what he said. That's the word that was used. His truest family. And now he's going to be with his aunt and cousin. Dave asks, when did you last see your aunt and cousin? A long time ago, I say, before the camp. So he hasn't seen them for a long time. And remember, we learned earlier in the story, and remember, we need to make those connections. We learned about that in fourth grade. Making those connections back to things that happened earlier in the text. We know that before Keck came to America, he was at a refugee camp. I can tell that Dave has many questions. I wonder if all America people will be so curious. My mouth is going to get very sore, stumbling on words all day long. So notice, again, that writerly mind, right? Notice how Catherine Applegate is letting the reader know through description how difficult it is for Keck to speak English. We stop at a light, hung high in the air, red and round like a baby's sun. So think about, remember we noticed earlier that he doesn't have the vocabulary for all of the things in English. But he's describing something. And remember, that was one of the whys we started to grow an answer for. Why is Catherine Applegate not telling him or not having him identify what this is? We know what that is. So notice, but she's describing it. And we have to do the work of figuring out what it is. Our fifth grade reader brain is going to say, why is she doing that? What message is she trying to tell us? Well, she's continuing to grow this idea that Keck is coming to a place that is so different from what he's used to. Dave asks in English. When I don't answer, he tries again, using my words. Did you like the flying boat? So think about the words that Catherine Applegate is choosing. Think about the craft, the how she is writing this story. I liked it very much, I say. I'd like to fly such a boat one day myself. When Mama comes, we'll take a flying boat around the world. I love that you're all jotting. Dave turns to look at me. You know, Keck, he says, we aren't sure where your mother is. His voice has the soft sting of pity in it. We don't know if she is. She's fine, I tell him, and I look out the window at the not dead trees. She will come, I say, and this time I use my words, my music. So notice how, as we're moving through, remember we talked about what does the author do, something that you're doing with your narrative, orienting you to the setting, orienting you to the characters, starting to develop the problem or conflict. You see the problem or conflict. Keck is there. His mother is not there. Dave is saying, we don't really know where your mother is. We don't know. And he stops there right before. You have to use your reader, your fifth grade reader brain to figure that out. She's fine, I tell him. So if you infer, you have an idea of what Keck is feeling in the situation. Okay, so one thing I do want to remind you of what we're doing and we're continuing to do. When we are reading in our independent book, we are continuing to write about our reading at a fifth grade level. And yesterday, I asked you to start doing that with sticky notes in your book. Remember to continue to do that when you're reading, whether you're reading this book here in class or whether you take it home and you're reading it at home. Also, the books that you are reading at home. That practice of writing about your reading at a fifth grade level, that practice of listening to a story with a writerly brain, a writerly mind, is going to help to deepen your comprehension, and it will give you lots of practice so that you can master the standards that we're working on in this unit. Okay, go ahead and finish. I see some of you are still jotting. Go ahead and finish what you're jotting, and then return to your seats.